I was thinking about something on my way here, how people define success. It feels like everyone has a different version of it.
Yeah, and somehow we're all expected to chase it as if there were only one correct path. What made you think about that?
I saw this guy on the train, probably in his early 30s, working on his laptop non-stop. He looked exhausted, but also determined. And I couldn't tell if he was close to achieving something or just stuck in a loop.
That's interesting. Sometimes determination and burnout look almost identical from the outside. Do you think ambition always leads to success?
Not necessarily. I think ambition is more like fuel. It can push you forward, but if you don't know where you're going, you just end up running in circles.
That's a good way to put it. I've always felt that ambition needs direction. Otherwise, it becomes pressure. And pressure can be dangerous if it's constant.
Exactly. I used to think that being ambitious meant always wanting more money, more recognition, more achievements. But now I'm not so sure.
So, what changed your perspective?
I realized that more doesn't always mean better. At some point, I started asking myself whether I was chasing things I actually wanted or just things I thought I was supposed to want.
That's a tough realization. A lot of people never question that. They just follow the script good job, promotions, bigger house, and so on.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that path if it genuinely makes someone happy. But I think the problem starts when people confuse external validation with personal fulfillment.
I agree. Success becomes performative at that point. You're not living for yourself anymore, you're living for how things look from the outside.
Exactly. And social media doesn't help either. It amplifies that pressure. Everyone's highlighting their achievements, their milestones, their wins.
Right? You rarely see the uncertainty behind those wins, the doubts, the failures, the long periods where nothing seems to work.
And that creates this illusion that successful people are always confident and always moving forward, which isn't true at all.
Not even close. Most of the people I admire have gone through phases where they felt completely lost, but that part usually stays invisible.
So, do you think failure is necessary for success?
I wouldn't say it's strictly necessary, but it's almost inevitable if you're trying to do something meaningful. You're going to make mistakes, you're going to misjudge situations.
And I guess how you respond to those moments matters more than the failure itself.
Exactly. Some people see failure as a sign to stop, while others see it as feedback. That mindset makes a huge difference over time.
That reminds me of something I read recently that resilience is more predictive of success than talent.
I believe that. Talent might give you a head start, but resilience keeps you going when things get difficult, and things always get difficult at some point.
True, but resilience isn't something you're just born with. You kind of have to develop it, right?
Yeah, it's built over time, usually through uncomfortable experiences. You learn to tolerate uncertainty, to deal with setbacks without collapsing.
That sounds a bit harsh, though, like you have to suffer to grow.
Not necessarily suffer, but you do have to face challenges. Growth rarely happens in comfort zones.
I guess that's where ambition comes in again. It pushes you out of that comfort zone.
Exactly. But there's a fine line. Healthy ambition motivates you, while unhealthy ambition can make you feel like you're never doing enough.
I've felt that before. Even when things were going well, I couldn't really enjoy it because I was already thinking about the next goal.
That's a common trap. You reach one milestone, and instead of celebrating it, you immediately move the goalpost.
And it becomes this endless cycle. You're always chasing, but never arriving.
Right? That's why I think redefining success is so important. Otherwise, you're just following a moving target.
So, how would you define success now?
For me, it's more about alignment, doing things that match my values, having a sense of purpose, and maintaining some level of balance in my life.
That sounds more sustainable than just chasing achievements.
It is, but it's also less clear. External success is easy to measure salary, titles, recognition. Internal success is more subjective.
And maybe that's why people struggle with it. It requires a lot more self awareness.
Definitely. You have to ask yourself difficult questions, like what actually matters to you and why.
And sometimes the answers aren't what you expected.
Exactly. You might realize that something you've been working towards for years doesn't actually fulfill you.
That must be frustrating.
It can be, but it can also be liberating. It gives you the chance to change direction.
I guess that takes courage, though, starting over or even just adjusting your path.
Yeah, because there's always uncertainty involved. You don't know if the new direction will work out.
But then again, you never really know that, even on a traditional path.
True, there's always some level of risk, no matter what you choose.
So maybe success isn't about eliminating risk, but about choosing which risks are worth taking.
I like that idea. It puts more emphasis on intentional decisions rather than just outcomes.
Exactly, because outcomes aren't always under your control. You can do everything right and still not get the result you wanted.
That's something people don't talk about enough. Effort doesn't always guarantee success.
No, but it increases the probability, and it builds skills, experience, and perspective along the way.
So even if you don't achieve your original goal, you still gain something valuable.
Exactly. And sometimes those unexpected outcomes lead to better opportunities.
That's true. I've had situations where things didn't go as planned, but in hindsight, it worked out for the best.
Same here. It's just hard to see that in the moment.
Yeah, when you're in the middle of it, it just feels like failure.
That's why perspective is important. Looking at your journey over a longer period can change how you interpret those moments.
So instead of asking, did I succeed or fail, you ask, what did I learn from this?
Exactly, it shifts the focus from judgment to growth.
That's a healthier approach, but I imagine it's not always easy to maintain.
It isn't, especially when there's pressure from others, family, society, even friends.
Yeah, expectations can be heavy. Sometimes you feel like you're being evaluated all the time,
And that can influence your choices more than you realize.
like choosing a career path that looks impressive rather than one that suits you.
Exactly, and then you end up feeling disconnected from your own life.
That sounds a bit extreme, but I can see how it happens gradually.
It usually does. Small compromises over time can lead you far away from what you actually want.
So, how do you avoid that?
I think it comes down to regular reflection, checking in with yourself and asking if you're still on a path that feels right.
That makes sense. Kind of like recalibrating.
Exactly, because priorities can change over time. What mattered to you 5 years ago might not matter as much now.
That's true. I used to be very focused on proving myself. Now I care more about stability and peace of mind.
That's a big shift, but a very common one.
Do you think ambition decreases with age?
Not necessarily decreases, but it evolves. It becomes less about external recognition and more about meaningful impact.
So instead of asking, how far can I go? You ask, why am I going there?
Exactly. The motivation becomes more intrinsic.
I like that. It feels more grounded
It is, and it tends to be more sustainable in the long run,
because you're not constantly comparing yourself to others.
right? Comparison can be very destructive if it becomes a habit.
Especially now when you can compare yourself to thousands of people instantly.
Yeah, and usually you're comparing your behind the scenes to someone else's highlight reel.
That's a classic problem. It distorts reality.
So maybe part of being successful is learning to filter out that noise.
I would say that's essential. Otherwise, your perception of success becomes distorted.
And you start chasing things that don't really belong to you.
Exactly. You end up living someone else's definition of success.
That's a bit unsettling when you think about it.
It is, but it's also something you can change once you're aware of it.
So, awareness is the first step.
Always. Without it, you're just reacting to external influences.
And with it, you can make more intentional choices.
Exactly. And that's where real autonomy comes in.
So, if you had to give one piece of advice about ambition and success, what would it be?
I'd say don't rush to define success too early. Give yourself time to explore, to make mistakes, and to understand what truly matters to you.
That's good advice. I think I'd add that it's okay to change your definition of success along the way.
Absolutely. It's not a fixed concept, it evolves as you do.
And maybe that's what makes it meaningful.
I think so. If it stayed the same forever, It wouldn't reflect who you are becoming.
That's a nice way to look at it.
Yeah, it takes some pressure off as well.
True, it makes the whole idea of success feel less rigid and more personal.
Exactly. And in the end, that's probably what matters most.
Yeah, figuring out what success actually means to you and not just following the default version.
That's the real challenge.
And maybe also the most rewarding part.
I'd say so.